Good evening, everybody. I am doing fine and dandy. How are you doing, Barb? Excellent. So, welcome to our third week of the how-to guide to sharing your faith. Our second week looking into the tactical approach that we talked about from Greg Koukl in Greg Koukl's book. If anybody bought the book or has read it before, you probably could tell from last week. It's that what we're doing here is not entirely Greg Koukl's book. I kind of add things of my own into it, but it's the basic general framework. So again, if you want to dive deeper into any of these things, I still do highly recommend his book. Just came out with a new 10th anniversary edition to it with a lot of new material. Welcome, welcome. There's an outline on that table right there if you want to grab one. That will, again, just kind of show you any scriptures we're going to be talking about tonight. Not as many tonight, but we've got a few in there. And kind of give you an outline of where, so you can kind of follow along of how we're progressing. And as usual, there is a place on the back to take some notes if you want to take some notes here this evening. All right, so last week we introduced the Columbo Tactic, and I will do a recap of what we talked about in regard to the Columbo Tactic here last week in a minute, so you can see how they all build. But we also spent the first part of last week kind of showing you the general framework of the fact that you're more prepared than you think you are. A lot of people think that they are, I just need to learn this a little bit more, or let me just do this thing, or let me just do this thing. And there's always something more you can do. And so I want to start out tonight by building on that part of the lesson where we talked about, first of all, last week I showed you how you're more prepared. And one of the things that I mentioned was that if you are a Christian, you already have at least something you can share. You have your own story that you can share. Even if you are still too intimidated coming out of this class to talk about anything else, you still have your story to share. And that's great, but the next natural question is, okay, Ken, but what does that mean? How do I do that? How do I share my story? I understand you say, I have a story. Tell me how to go about doing that. And I can think of no better way to explain how to share your personal testimony. I don't recommend using that word testimony in conversation because to non-Christians, that sounds like you're asking them to take the witness stand in court. It's one of those Christianisms that we have that we know what it means, but sounds like we're talking Greek to the outside world. But that's why I prefer to say sharing your story. But yes, have you ever heard that, share your testimony? What's your testimony? That's what we're talking about. How do you tell people out in the world about what great dance moves you have, apparently? And this is why, if you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, you got to come in person because you have no idea what that joke was about. So, all right. Anyway, I can think of no better example than the Apostle Paul. And there's instances in the book of Acts where Luke, who was the author of Acts, the same guy who wrote the Gospel of Luke, shares how Paul shared his testimony. And so I'm going to start out tonight's class by looking at what Paul's methodology was and encouraging you to follow the same methodology. All right? And so our first passage that I want to read, and they're both pretty long ones, is from the book of Acts. Both are from the book of Acts, chapter 22, verses 1 through 22. All right? And I'll read this first one and then just get your Bible or Bible apps ready because I'm going to ask for volunteers for the next passage when we get to it. All right? So here's what Luke says in Acts 22. Listen to, what I'm going to ask you to be paying attention to, all right, is I want you to kind of outline the method. I'm not asking you to focus as I read this on the specific details. There's not going to be a test afterwards of, give me Paul's biography, okay? It's what approach did he do? If you had to write an outline for how he decided to give his testimony, what his strategy was, what his structure was, that's what I want you to look at, all right? So it says this, brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense. This is Paul talking, all right? When they heard him speak to them in Aramaic, they became very quiet. Then Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death. This way meaning Christianity. That's what it was called originally. All right? Arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison, as the high priest and all the council can themselves testify. I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus, and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. I have no idea how much. Good job. Now I got to change the slide. There we go. All right. If I go on too long after slide, just say, "Kid, switch the slide." About noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" I asked. "I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting," he replied. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. "What shall I do, Lord?" I asked. Am I still good? All right. "Get up," the Lord said, "and go into Damascus. There you will be told all that you have been assigned to do." My companions led me by the hand into Damascus because the brilliance of the light had blinded me. Boom. A man named Ananias came to see me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, "Brother Saul, receive your sight." And at that very moment, I was able to see him. Then he said, "The God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all people of what you have seen and heard. And now what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, and wash your sins away, calling on his name." When I returned to Jerusalem and was praying at the temple, I fell in a trance and saw the Lord speaking to me. "Quick," he said, "leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me." There we go. "Lord," I replied, "these people know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing him. Then the Lord said to me, 'Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles.'" All right. Big, long story, right? Before I flip to the next slide, what did Paul start with?
His defense, his story.
His story, but where did he start? Where did he start his story? Did he start, for example, with when he met Jesus? No. Where did he start?
Persecuting Jesus and his people.
He was persecuting, right?
He started with his training
He started with his training,
under Gamaliel.
right? And then he did get into when he met Jesus on the road to Damascus, right? And then did he stop there? Did he stop with where he met Jesus? Or did he keep talking?
He kept talking about the fact that he was being blind and then brought back. And that convinced him of God.
And that convinced him of God. And even after that, yeah.
He devoted his life to be, to do God's will.
He devoted his life to do God's will. Exactly. So if we were to summarize this, all right, about how did Paul share his story, all right? First, he talked about his life before he met Jesus and what he was like before he met Jesus. Then he talked about how, in fact, he became Christian, right? But he didn't stop there. His third step was he talked about how his life changed, devoting his life to Jesus, for example, how his life changed after becoming Christian, after meeting Jesus, all right? That's your framework for telling your story. It's not enough just to tell people about number 2, for example. Because if you just tell them about number 2, then they don't see the change from number 1 to number 3. Now, everybody's story is going to look a little different. I mean, I'll be honest. I grew up in the church. All right, I was a kid that went to a Sunday school. I went to youth group. I was actually voted most likely to be a pastor in my confirmation class. You didn't know there were awards, I guess, or in your confirmation class. And it wasn't, I don't think, because I demonstrated any particular aptitude to be a pastor. They should have seen it was a lawyer in my future, because I was the one that was asking all the questions. I was cross-examining the pastor that was teaching it. But yeah, so obviously, is my story going to be the same as someone who was not a Christian growing up and then had some kind of profound encounter as an adult? No, of course our stories are going to be different. That doesn't mean that I don't still have things I can talk about as far as before I met Jesus, when I met Jesus, and after I met Jesus. Because of course there were times I could tell you some stories about some of the things I did as a kid. I won't, because this is being recorded, and I don't know what the statute of limitations is. No, but I will tell you one story. This is a complete side note, and I had nothing to do with this. I really didn't, okay? But people thought I did, because it was my group of friends that did it. And I just couldn't get out that night. So they wanted to go out at night and just party, and this was when we were in high school. And I did not go. And I found out the next morning that they just decided they went to the grocery store, got a bunch of bologna. And they went and they figured bologna can stick to things, right? So they threw it all over City Hall. And the beautiful thing was, these were high school kids. They didn't think anything beyond bologna sticks. Let's go throw it at something, all right? But the local newspaper the next morning had a big article about overnight how someone had made a political statement and throw bologna all over City Hall as a comment about our city council. That was not true at all, but anyway, I did not do that one. We won't talk about the ones I did. But
You weren't full of bologna, though.
no, I was not full of bologna. But, you know, my point is that we all have stories we can tell. We all have things that we did in our past that we would not do now, and that we recognize that we are sinners and we need salvation. We need a Savior. All right? Yeah. So, what I want to do with the next passage we're going to read is from Acts 26, verses 4 through 23. All right? And I'm going to ask for some volunteers to save my voice reading this one, but this one, I've laid it out for you. All right, so you'll see the divisions. In this one, we're going to look at the first part. We're going to see how first Paul talked about his life before he met Jesus. So can I get a volunteer to read for me, let's just say verses 4 through 8 for starters. Go ahead, Bart.
The Jewish people all know the way I have lived ever since I was a child, from the beginning of my life in my own country and also in Jerusalem. They've known me for a long time and can testify, if they are willing, that I conform to the strictest set of religion, living as a Pharisee. And now it is because of my hope in what God has promised our ancestors that I am on trial today. This is the promise our 12 tribes are hoping to see fulfilled as they earnestly serve God day and night. King Agrippa, it is because of this hope that these Jews are accusing me. Why should any of you consider it incredible that God raises the dead?
But he's not done yet. Can I get a volunteer now to read verses 9 through, 11? Yeah.
I too was convinced that I ought to do all that was possible to oppose the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And it's just what I did in Jerusalem. When the authority of the chief priests had put many of the Lord's people in prison, and when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. Many a time I went from one synagogue to another to have them punished, and I tried to force them to blaspheme. I was so obsessed with persecuting them that I even hunted them down in foreign cities.
I even hunted them down in foreign cities. You see what he's doing here, all right? He's kind of set the stage. He opens up by saying, hey, this is who I was before, folks. You need to understand that. If you truly want to understand the impact that Jesus has had on me, you need to know my starting point and where I was coming from. It doesn't do us any good to say, I've been changed. Tell people how you've been changed, all right? We've all got that story. All right, moving on then, we shift to him talking about how he became a Christian. And here we have verses 12 through 15 for starters on the screen. Do we have a volunteer for these? Thank you.
On one of these journeys, I was going to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests. About noon, King Agrippa, as I was on the road, I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, blazing around me and my companions. We all fell to the ground, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against
The goads. it's an expression, meaning you ever try to do something that's just futile? You're trying to do something and it's impossible to accomplish.
Then I ask, who are you, Lord?
All right. And keep going all the way here. Somebody finishes off here through verse, what are we at? Whatever's on the screen, verse 18. Tom, you looked at me.
Jesus, who are
Oh,
persecuted,
never mind.
the Lord replied, now get up and stand on your feet. I've appeared to you to appoint you as a servant and as a witness of what you have seen and will see of me. I will rescue you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I am sending you to them to open their eyes and turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, so that they may receive forgiveness of sins and a place among those who are sanctified by faith in me.
All right, so that's the portion of his story about how he met Christ and how he came to be a Christian, right? But he doesn't stop there. He goes on to talking about how his life changed after becoming a Christian. And this is all right here on the screen. There's no second screen. So can somebody read for us here verses 19 through 23?
Sure.
Thanks.
So then, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the vision from heaven, first to those in Damascus, and then to those in Jerusalem, and in all Judea, and then to the Gentiles. I preached that they should repent and turn to God, and demonstrate their repentance by their deeds. That is why some Jews seized me in the temple courts and tried to kill me. But God has helped me to this very day. So I stand here and testify, to small and great alike. I am saying nothing beyond what the prophets and Moses said would happen, that the Messiah would suffer, and as the first to rise from the dead would bring the message of light to his own people and to the Gentiles.
And I'm sorry?
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah, yes. Do you see the framework? All right. So that's my challenge to you all this week, is I want you to think through that framework and think of how you would express your own story. All right. Where were you at before Jesus? How did you meet Jesus? Where are you about? What happened? What changed after you met Jesus? All right. Every single one of us can do at least that much. All right. Everyone. So even if you don't get anything else out of this class, I want you to get that. And so that's the challenge. Think it through. Plan it out. Because it can be, if you thought it through ahead of time, then you don't feel as much pressure if you're put on the spot. If a situation does arise where you have the opportunity to share your story, you'll have already thought about it. You've already got your script, right? And so plan it out ahead of time using that model. All right. Moving on. A recap, really quick recap of what we talked about last week in regard to the Columbo Tactic. Remember, we introduced this idea of Detective Columbo, who, if you've never watched the old classic TV show Columbo, you haven't lived. It's great. I love it. All right. I love Detective Columbo. My wife will tell you, I watched that entire series probably at least 3 times all the way through. I love it. He's fun. I love Peter Falk. Yeah. So, but the whole point of the reason it's named after Columbo is because he asks questions, right? It's question after question after question. And that is how you effectively, tactically engage with someone who maybe is raising specific objections. So now we're not just talking about someone wants to hear your story, you share your story. Now we're talking about you're at a party sometime and someone has said something. We'll have a few examples here tonight as well. Someone has made a claim, a negative claim about your Christian faith. How do you respond? Well, the instinct is for us to just like to jump in and start talking, when really what you're starting to see, no. Instead, you should ask questions and ask them in a tactical manner. We said that Greg Koukl defined the Columbo Tactic as going on the offensive in an inoffensive way with carefully selected questions that productively advance the conversation. And we said there's several advantages to engaging in this manner, to having conversations this manner. Number one, questions are interactive. They invite other people to participate. If you're asking questions, you're not getting into a hostile argument. You're having a conversation. You're showing interest in the other party and what they think, right? And you have to be genuine about it. Also, we said questions make headway without requiring you to state your case. And this is what I say with this tactical approach, folks. People always say, oh, I just need to do this study. I need to do this study. I need to know a little bit more. No, you don't. You don't have to know anything. beside your initial story, which you talked about, right? You don't have to know anything to ask questions of other people. Nothing. All right? So it's not an excuse to say I need to do more study before I can go out there and talk to people about my faith. Questions also shift the burden of proof to the other person. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. So you'll see what that means. And most importantly, the Columbo tactic puts you in the driver's seat. And what Greg Koukl means by that is you're in control of the conversation. The biggest problem a lot of people will say they have in being hesitant to go out and share their faith is they're not comfortable. They're scared about what's going to happen if this person says this or that, or what this person's going to think of me, or am I going to embarrass myself? But if you're the one controlling the conversation, then that's not a concern. That's not an issue. You're in control because you're the one directing where that conversation goes because you're the one asking the questions. All right? And we talked about what the first Columbo question is, and that is, what do you mean by that? Right? So someone makes a statement. The first thing you say is, what do you mean by that? This is a clarification question. It helps you learn what the other person thinks, so number one, so you understand them accurately. And number two, so you don't misrepresent them. Because that's what we would not want someone else misrepresenting us, so we do not misrepresent them, right? You want to make sure that you're clear about what they think. You need to ask that genuinely. You're not belittling, you're not ridiculing, you're asking out of genuine interest for them to explain in more detail what they mean. And here's the thing. Lots of times you ask that question, and speaking from experience, you will get a blank stare back because they have no idea what they mean by that. They've never thought it through, all right? They're just repeating something that they heard someone else say or that they saw on the internet. So again, you need to be polite, you need to be respectful about it, but you are showing interest in them, and you might be the first person that's ever invited them to actually think about what they mean by that, to think through their beliefs. So that's your quick crash course on what we did last week. So this week, we're going to talk about what we call using the Columbo approach to reverse the burden of proof. And to get into this, first thing I need to explain to you is what is the difference between telling a story and making an argument. Now, this is not telling your story. That's why I was emphasizing your story before, okay? That's your testimony, all right? What I'm talking about is something a lot of people do when they, especially on the internet, they love doing this on the internet. Go to the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel, look at the comments section, you'll see this all over the place, all right? Telling a story or telling a just so, making a just so statement is what some people will call it. It's basically where someone just states a conclusion. They just make a statement. They just say something, but they don't back it up, all right? They state it in such a way that they just assume sometimes that everybody's going to agree with them. Why? Because most of the time, we're in our culture today, we're afraid to challenge people. And I don't mean challenge with animosity. I just mean, like we've talked about, ask them questions about it. Dig deeper into it. People will say things in a manner that they sound like they know what they're talking about, and nobody ever asks them to see if they actually do. All right? That's what Columbo does. I'll give you an example. It is a very common Muslim claim. It's actually one of their essentials of their faith. All right? Obviously, those of you who were in this class, what's the high holy book of Islam called? The Quran, right? All right, now, what you may or may not have known is that they do still consider other writings, including the Old and New Testament, to be good spiritual writings that you can gain insight from. Now, they are below the Quran, obviously, in importance, but they do still consider the Bible to be scripture for them. But here's the problem. On many occasions, the Bible contradicts what's in the Quran. So how do you deal with that? Well, the answer that most Muslims will give you today is that our modern Bibles have been corrupted. That they'll just make a statement that says that the early church changed what the Bible said. So originally, the Bible said things that were completely in line with the Quran, but at some point, the early church got their hands on it and they changed it so that now it looks different. And they'll just make that statement and make it as a just so statement. A good way of thinking about it is imagine if someone were to start their statement with the phrase, well, one could say, someone could say, you ask them, why is the Bible, if the Bible is a holy book, why is it different than the Quran? Well, one could say that the Bible was corrupted because the early Christians got their hands on it and changed it. All right, well, one could say anything, but it's one thing just to say something, it's a completely different matter to support it, to show that it's a reasonable thing to say. I could say the moon is made of green cheese, but the mere fact that I say that doesn't make the moon made of green cheese, doesn't make that a plausible thing to say, all right? Unfortunately, that's something that we've lost in our discourse nowadays. People just say things, and they never stop to think if they can actually support those things, prove those things. All right, so that is the difference between a story and an argument. All right, a story is just a statement. At best, it's a theory. You could call it a theory or a hypothesis, which we'll talk about a little more in a moment. But it's nothing more than that. Whereas an argument is something that is backed up by evidence, by reasoning. You're backing it up to try to show, to demonstrate that it's actually true. You're not just stating it's true. Now, here's where we get ourselves in trouble. Someone will make a statement, like the one I've mentioned here. You'll be talking to a Muslim, and they'll tell you, the Bible's been corrupted, the early church changed it. If you were to hear someone say that, what would be your instinct? What would you want to say next?
What do you mean by that?
Okay, yeah, so you're paying attention to class. Let's pretend you weren't in my class.
You say, no, that isn't true.
You know that isn't true, all right?
Can you show me an example?
See, and that's what we should be doing, right? The instinct a lot of us have, because we want to defend Jesus, right, is we want to just jump in and almost feel like we need to disprove their claim. That when someone says the Bible's corrupted, all of a sudden, I want to go and give you all this evidence to show that it wasn't. Why? I didn't make the claim, they did. And the rule is, he who makes the claim bears the burden. Yes, exactly, the burden of proof. And this holds true for you too, mind you, all right? And so if you make a claim in discussion, if you say, I believe that something is true, then it is reasonable for whoever you're talking to ask you to defend that and support that. It works both ways. But if somebody makes a claim that they come and they say that the Bible was corrupted by the early church, don't let them switch it around on you. And we'll see how that plays out a little bit more. They have the responsibility to support the claim that they make. All right? Think of it like a house. This is a little imagery that Greg Koukl uses in his book. You pretend you have a house, all right? The conclusion, that's the statement, in this case, the Bible was corrupted, is represented by the roof of the house, all right? But in order to have a roof, what do you need to have? Walls, supporting it, holding it up, right? And so the reasons would be the walls. The evidence would be the walls. And so people can show you a roof, but in order to know whether that roof is up high or down sitting on the ground all by itself, you got to see if there's walls supporting it, right? So that's kind of the imagery that he uses. Now, what is our second Columbo question then? It is this. How did you come to that conclusion? So you've asked them, what do you mean by that? Enough that you think you're confident that you have a good, solid understanding of what their position is. Your next question is some variety of, how did you come to that conclusion? And the beautiful thing about this statement, as Greg Koukl explains in his book, it charitably assumes that the critic, the person you're talking to, has not just told a story or made an unsubstantiated claim, but that they have done some thinking. So you're giving them the benefit of the doubt here. By asking them, how did you come to that conclusion? You're assuming they did go through some kind of process to arrive at that conclusion. They're not just repeating something they saw on the internet, all right? So it's charitable in that respect. And there's different ways you can phrase it. All right, there's some other examples that Koukl gives. Why do you say that? Is the same question. That's still, how did you come to that conclusion? It means the same thing. What are your reasons for holding that view? What makes you think it happened that way? Or I'm curious, why does that idea seem compelling to you? All right? And again, here's the key, folks. You have to say it like you're genuinely interested. Let's take that last one. If I were to say that, I'm curious, why does that idea seem compelling to you? Does that sound genuine? No, I'm belittling them, right?
Or accusing almost.
Or accusing almost, right? Belligerent, right. It can't be that. Because the whole point of this tactical approach is you are treating people with the respect that all humankind deserves, all right? You need to do that. In love, exactly. You're defending truth, but in love. Not just because that's what we should do, all right? But also because the moment you become belligerent, conversation's over, folks. It's done. You're not getting any more headway at that point in time. So you have to be asking it from a genuine place and be sincere about it. All right. Here's another quote from Greg Koukl that explains the difference between these two questions and what they both accomplish, and then we're going to see it in action here. I'm going to show you some examples. We'll go over some examples. He says the first Columbo question, right? What do you mean by that? Helps you know what a person thinks. The second question helps you know why he thinks the way he does. It charitably assumes he has actually come to a conclusion, that he has reasons for his view and not merely strong feelings about it. Now, just like I said with the first question of what do you mean by that, if you ask someone, how did you come to that conclusion, what do you think the response is going to be 90% of the time? Most of the time, people have not come to a conclusion. Again, we just don't form our beliefs that way, folks. And this is something I'm going to encourage you as well. We as Christians need to do better. The Bible is not afraid of examination. It's truth. It says test everything. Romans 1:20 says that God's invisible qualities can be seen in what has been made. All right, we're not afraid of truth. But so many people, especially in the age of social media, we arrive at our beliefs, at our worldviews, almost more emotionally than logically and reasonably. We don't use reason anymore. And so most of the time when you're having conversations with someone, unless you're talking to some college professor that does this and speaks on this stuff for a living, obviously, you're going to get some really weird responses, if you get a response at all, because people haven't thought through why they believe that. They believe it because they heard someone that they like say it, and that's why they believe it, all right? Or because it supports what they want to be true. That is most common that I see is people will just say things, sometimes the most completely illogical things, because it's what they want to be true. And that is just as true in the skeptical world as it is in the Christian world. I've said before that I do a weekly podcast on Tuesday nights called Hey Ask Me Stuff on our YouTube channel. I just did one last night where the entire episode was I was basically evaluating a sermon that was given by a pastor in the PCUSA that has been kind of making the rounds on social media lately. And I mean, clearly the pastor was saying the most illogical things in the world because it led to a conclusion that she wanted to be true. And that the punchline was when she basically said, did you realize that in the Garden of Eden, God lied? God lied to Adam and Eve, and the serpent, i.e. Satan, told the truth. I mean, at that point, if you're standing in a pulpit and you think you're a Christian pastor and you're telling people that they shouldn't trust God, but they can trust Satan, shouldn't that set off some alarm bells in your head that maybe you've been led astray? I would think maybe it would. But again, people will check their brains at the door in order to cling to something that they want to be true, all right? And again, if you think you as a Christian are immune to that, no, you're not. This is humanity. This is why you need to be willing to have conversations, to raise questions. And we as a Christian church need to encourage questions, not discourage them. I've seen far too many pastors in my years as an apologist who think that apologetics should have no role in the church. For those who don't know that term, it comes from 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. That word answer is apologia in Greek, and that's where we get the word apologetics from, or apologist, which is what I have my degree in. And just basically means I defend the Christian faith. I answer questions about the Christian faith to people who don't believe in it. That's what I do. All right, that's my role here, among others. But this is all the more reason why I think we need to encourage questions in our churches so that we don't have Christians that are purely arriving at their decisions based on emotions, trying to please mom and dad or whatever, that they actually internalize their belief, their faith themselves, so that if they go off to college and they have some authoritative professor standing in front of them, that they won't lose faith, all right, because they have a solid foundation. You talk about the professor again here in a little bit. All right, so let's see this question played out. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a very short video. This is maybe 15 seconds long, all right? And this is part of a question and answer session. There is a well-known Christian apologist. His name is Frank Turek. His ministry is called Cross-Examined. And he wrote a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. And he goes around the country and he speaks on college campuses. And he gives this presentation. And then after the presentation, he opens up the floor to questions, all right? And this is one of the students that stood up at one of his question and answer sessions, and you'll hear the student ask a question. You're going to hear how Frank responds to that student, and then what the student's reply was, all right? So just listen to this very brief exchange, and then we'll talk about it afterwards.
Easter is a pagan holiday, which worked itself into Christianity. Same thing with Christmas.
Okay, but what evidence do you have for that?
You can literally Google it. You can look up.
Yeah, I know. There's a lot of stuff on the internet that isn't necessarily true.
All right. First of all, what was the claim the student made?
Easter and Christmas are pagan holidays.
Easter and Christmas are pagan holidays. How did Frank Turek respond?
Why do you say that?
Or if we were to use Greg Koukl's words, how'd you come to that conclusion, right? This is the tactical approach in practice, folks. This student made a claim, and Frank Turek didn't take the bait. He didn't launch into a whole big explanation of, well, let me give you the evidence to show that's not true. Instead, he shifted the burden back to the student by asking a simple, respectful question. How'd you come to that conclusion? And what did the student say in response? Google it. You can Google it, right? Oh my gosh, you have no idea how often I hear that, all right? That is the new sound of crickets. Before Google, if I were to ask somebody, well, how'd you come to that conclusion? You quite often just hear the sound of crickets chirping because they didn't know what to say. And now this is how they fill that void. They say, oh, you can just Google it. I mean, seriously. First of all, that is an admission that they don't know what they're talking about, okay? When someone says you can just Google it, that's them saying, I can't actually support this. So I'm just going to try to say something almost a little belittling to make it look like my view is so obvious that I shouldn't have to support it. Just Google it. Because we all know that every answer you find on Google is completely accurate, right? There's no falsehoods on the internet at all. Yeah, this is, especially on college campuses, the just Google it line is it's probably 80% of the time that's what they'll say when they don't have an answer. And again, we can be respectful and continue to ask questions and not let them get away with that. You know, it's like, no, I understand. I'm sorry.
How did he follow up?
I don't know. This was a YouTube short and that was the end of it, so I didn't see the rest of the exchange.
To a certain extent, I don't agree with what the guy was saying, but
Right.
I understand, I think not Easter because Passover and
Mm-hmm.
and that kind. But Christmas probably was not December 20th. Christ's birth was probably not December.
Oh, sure. And no Christian claims it was December 25th, right?
Wasn't that because that was the darkness and we were showing the light coming into the world?
Well, it was both of the, here's the suggestion is because both of these holidays, there were pagan holidays around those times on the calendar. Yeah. And so people say just because when the Christian church was growing, of course, they didn't want people being tempted to participate in these pagan holidays. And so what they would do is they basically made their Christian celebrations around the same time.
That a lot of people obviously were uneducated and it was easier to teach about light when there was so much darkness.
Sure.
Than they brought.
Sure. But the same thing is true with Easter. There was the spring, gosh, I'm drawing a blank on it now, but yeah, there was a pagan holiday around that same time.
But I don't think, in my mind.
In the spring.
That one as much because we know the Passover.
Right. And because that's where we date it from, yeah.
I mean, one time, Jehovah's Witnesses told me Jesus wasn't born on Christmas.
Jesus was not born on December 25th. We don't know when Jesus was born. And so that's just the date the church chose to celebrate his birth. But it's not like we are dating his birth. Nobody's ever claimed that was actually his birthday. He most definitely was not. He was not born in the winter, most likely.
According to the birth of John the Baptist,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of March, the Baptist on the 15th day of Nisan, the first month of on Jewish lunar calendar. So he's 6 months after John of the Baptist. About September 23rd is his birthday.
Which would be, but again, it's demonstrating it wasn't December 25th, but it doesn't matter. It's just, that's just the date we're celebrating. Right, the important thing is what are we celebrating, not when are we celebrating it, right?
On the Tabernacle Feast.
Yeah.
Tabernacle Feast of Sukkot.
I'm sorry?
Jesus is born on the Tabernacle Feast of Sukkot.
Yeah, so it doesn't, ultimately, if we're just celebrating Christ's birth, it doesn't matter what day it actually happened because we're celebrating who he is, not a particular day. It doesn't matter. But the point here is, and honestly, I would, if I was in this exchange, and that's the answer I've gotten, I've done this sometimes when you know, I like his responses like, well, we all know there's some things that you can find on the internet. Not everything you find on the internet is true. So I'm just kind of curious, how did you come to that conclusion? I understand you say I can Google it, but what is it that you found convincing that persuaded you that that was the case? You know, and eventually, look, you're going to get dancing and dodging because they're not going to answer it. And you do have to use grace. And so there will a time will come when you're going to have to back off and trust you've put that stone in their shoe. Remember, that's your goal. And all your goal is not necessarily to get everybody all the way to the foot of the cross in every conversation. Your goal is to give them something to think about. And so at some point when you have kind of pressed it several times, politely, graciously, to try to get them to give their reasons for review, and they can't, then if it's a regular just face-to-face conversation, then you'll have to just that's okay, thank you very much, and you just trust that you've done what you can do. Now in this type of environment, I suspect he did go on to give some of the evidence because this is a little different. This isn't just a personal conversation across the dinner table. This is where he has gone and made a presentation, and now this is a Q&A session. So I think, I'm assuming, because I've seen him do this approach in the past, where he'll use his tactical approach first to kind of get the student thinking about, the fact that maybe they don't have the view, that they haven't really thought this through. And then he'll go through and he'll actually provide something of an answer. But that's not, you don't have to do that. That's what I want to impress upon you, is that in your daily interactions out there in the world, you don't have to feel the responsibility to respond to someone else's claim. They are the ones that have to support it. So if you don't feel like you have all the knowledge necessary and you're equipped to give a detailed answer, that doesn't mean you can't have that conversation. You can just ask them the questions like we're talking about with this tactical approach. All right. Another example, and this is, if you've been in my classes before, you know he's one of my favorite scholars, I say tongue-in-cheek, Richard Dawkins. All right. Richard Dawkins, probably most famous for writing the book, The God Delusion. But this is another book he wrote called The Blind Watchmaker. And again, I'm not taking a stance one way or another about macroevolution. If you want my viewpoint on it, I do think it's got some holes. But this is, he's writing a book basically, in this particular part of it, he's defending evolution, macroevolution. But look at how he defends it, all right? Remember what we're talking about. Are you just making a statement, or are you supporting it? Are you providing reasons to believe it's plausible? This is what he said. He said, how did wings get their start? Many animals leap from bough to bough and sometimes fall to the ground. Especially in a small animal, the whole body surface catches the air and assists the leap or breaks the fall by acting as a crude aerofoil. Any tendency to increase the ratio of surface area to weight would help. For example, flaps of skin growing out in the angles of joints. From here, there is a continuous series of gradations to gliding wings, and hence to flapping wings. One could say that, all that. Sure, one could say, and maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with coming up with hypotheses. That's how science works, right? Is you're going to come up with a theory, you're going to come up with a hypothesis, but then what do? You have to prove it. You have to test it, right? Too often, people will just state something they think could possibly fit the facts, could be true, and act like they've done everything they have to do. No, you still have to take that next step. right? And Richard Dawkins never did in his book. I mean, there's all sorts of questions with this. The biggest question, just so you know, this is not a science class, I'm not going to go into it too much, but any type of changes like what he's describing here require an influx of genetic information. If you think of your DNA as the instruction manual to make you, right? Well, the DNA for a single-celled organism is a lot shorter than the DNA for a human being. Why? Because it requires a lot more instructions to build you than it does to build a single-celled organism. So as you get more complex in biology, you have to have an explanation for where does this new genetic information come from. Not just the genetic information that's already there that could mutate or change, but then you still have the same amount of genetic information. Where do you get this new information in? And I'm not saying that challenge can't be met. All I'm saying is that's a question that needs to be addressed if you're going to give an explanation like this. You have to say, well, where did all this new genetic information come from to make these new body types, these new body structures that you're just kind of saying, just so. One could say, it's not enough. All right, you need more to support it. All right? Do we see how that plays out, the difference between a story and an argument, and how people just use their stories, just their statements, and act like that's the end of the discussion? All right? And how this question of how did you come to that conclusion can help dig underneath that. Now, there are two questions. When someone gives you a story, when someone gives you an explanation, there are two questions that should be running through your mind. Number one, is what they're saying possible? And number two, is what they're saying plausible? Now, I'm saying these questions should be running through your mind. That does not mean that you should go on the offensive and start, again, trying to disprove their claim. All right? But this is what you need to think about as they're stating this, because it might help guide you in what questions you're going to be asking them. All right? If somebody tells you that I think the tides on Earth happen because the moon is made of green cheese, and as we all know about green cheese, it stinks, right? And the hydrogen particles in the water react to the stinkiness of green cheese. And so as the moon moves around the Earth, the water is either receding away from it or coming towards it, depending about how much that stinkiness is.
Sounds plausible.
It sounds plausible to you? You think so? I'm pretty proud of that. I just made that one up off the top of my head. All right. I could say that, and it's in some way an explanation for tides, right? But is it possible? Well, no, hydrogen doesn't have noses, okay? They can't smell, and the moon is not made of green cheese. Is it plausible? No. And so you need to be thinking through that as people are giving you these explanations, those two questions. All right, there are some exceptions to what I've told you, though. There are some types of statements that nobody, whether it be a Christian, whether it be an atheist, nobody should be expected to have to defend the truth of these statements. And these are statements what we call self-evident truths. All right? You've heard me talk about some of these in some previous classes, but I should not, for example, have to defend the proposition that a circle is not a square. All right? It's inherent in the definition of what a circle is that it doesn't have four corners and four sides, which is the definition of a square. All right, that's a self-evident truth. I should not have to defend that a bachelor is not married. Again, it's in the definition of a bachelor that they're not married. So if somebody says, you know, Joe the bachelor wasn't married, you shouldn't say, well, how'd you come to that conclusion? No, okay, that's not reasonable to ask of them. And the third one is a little more subtle, because people do try to deny this one, but it's just as illogical. You ever heard somebody, I can't remember which professor the story's attributed to, but he was giving a speech, and similarly afterwards he had a question and answer session, and a student came up to the microphone and said, Professor, how do I know that I exist? And the professor, he had his glasses on like this, and he kind of puts his glasses down over his nose and said, and whom should I say is asking? And the reason for that is because the moment, just think about grammatical structure. What did he say? How do I know that I exist? In even asking the question, he was assuming there was a someone, I, who existed to ask it and who existed to know the answer to it. That's the type of question that you can't even ask without kind of disproving the question in the first place, without assuming what you're trying to question. All right, that's another form of a self-evident truth. You can't deny your own existence because in the very act of trying to deny it, you implicitly assume it. Okay, those types of things nobody should be defended or required to defend. All right, now what I want to do for the rest of this class is I'm going to give you a few examples to see how these first two questions, what do you mean by that, and how did you come to that conclusion, can play out in certain common scenarios and how they can keep you in the driver's seat of conversations. The first example that Greg Koukl gives is what he calls the professor's ploy. This does not need to just be a professor, a college student in a class, all right? But it's very easily illustrated in that scenario. And the example he gives goes something like this. Let's pretend that you've got a student in a college classroom and the professor says something like, the Bible is just a book filled with a bunch of fables and myths. And the student responds, like I have on the screen, Professor, I don't think that's true. The Bible is the Word of God. First, let me ask you this. Did the student say anything that was incorrect? No. So everything the student said was correct. Did the student make a tactical error? Again, we're talking about how to approach the conversations. I want you to think through, what do you think is going to happen next as a result of what that student said? What do you think a professor is going to do next?
Well, how do you prove that the Bible is the Word of God?
Exactly. Now, because of what the student said, the professor, and I put the belligerence up here because this is how I see it a lot of times. Okay, student, go ahead. Tell us why you think people come from dust, donkeys can talk, and a man can survive in the belly of a fish for 3 days. Because they won't just say defend it. They'll belittle you and insult you and make you seem like you're ridiculous from the get-go, right? All things that did happen in the Bible, by the way, in case you didn't know that. So, in this case, what did the professor do? First of all, who made the claim to begin with? The professor, right? But as a result of the way the student answered, now who has the burden of proof? The student. You see, this is the professor's ploy, all right? They made the claim, but they shifted the burden of proof onto the student. Because the student made a claim, all right? Because the student made a claim, don't fall for that trick, all right? You have to ask the question, so how could they have done it differently? I've lost place in my notes here. All right. The student is not likely to win in this conversation, all right? And it's because of another rule that Greg Koukl mentions. First, if we were talking about this in terms of warfare and strategy in war, the phrase you might have heard before is never make a frontal assault on a superior force in an entrenched position, all right? Or if we were to analogize it to this scenario, the man with the microphone wins, period, all right? If you're a student sitting in a class with a bunch of students that need that professor's good graces to get a good grade in that class, this is what was completely unreal. I love the movie God's Not Dead, if you've seen it. Completely unrealistic. Never happened in real life. Because those students need that professor to like them, and they're going to side with that professor every single time. All right? The professor is in a superior tactical position than the student is in that scenario. So you can't go in expecting that you can just make claims and the professor's not going to turn it around on you and make you look foolish. All right? Instead, use your Columbo questions. When the professor makes a claim such as the Bible's just full of a bunch of fairy tales. Excuse me, professor? Yeah, I was just wondering, could you elaborate on that a little bit? Tell me what you mean by that. Okay. Now, have you made a claim yet? No, you haven't claimed anything, have you? The professor can't turn this around on you. So then the professor says, well, I mean, they're fairy tales. They're not true. They're just myths. They're all made up. Professor, how did you come to that conclusion? You're just a good student at this point, right? You're trying to learn. You're inviting that professor to give you more information. Now, sometimes the professor may see through what you're doing and say, okay, well, you're obviously one of those evangelical Christian types, right? So go ahead. Why don't you come up here in front of the class and you can defend why you think this is all God's word and all completely true. Professor, I didn't make any claim. I never said that. I'm just here to learn from you. You know, you made the claim and I'm just trying to get more information, that's all. Don't let them turn the burden of proof on you. You can see where this is not just something that's done by professors, all right? This is a conversational technique that people will do to avoid defending their own claims, and instead, they will look for an opening in something you said to shift the burden onto you to make you have to be the one to defend your position. Don't fall for it. Just ask questions. And sometimes, remember, stone in their shoe. That's all you're doing. First of all, if you ever were in a college classroom in front of a professor like this, understand you're not asking questions for that professor's benefit. You're never going to change that professor's mind. All right? Not in front of their whole student body. Who are you really there to benefit? The rest of the students around you, right? And so you do not try to make that frontal assault on superior force. You're not going to win a one-to-one argument with the professor. But if you ask these questions, and the rest of those students hear the professor dodging those questions or not giving very good explanations, you've put a stone in their shoe. Done. You're done. All right? Don't feel like you have to take it any further than that. You ask them, well, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Thank you, Professor. Sorry for the interruptions. Go ahead. That's it. That's all you've got to do. All right? All right. So that is the professor's ploy. The other approach, the other way you can use your Columbo questions we've talked about so far is to do what's called getting out of the hot seat. Look, we've all been there, right? Sometimes there are situations we get in where it becomes very clear very quickly that whoever we're talking to, number one, is maybe a bit aggressive, all right? Or they're just talking so fast and throwing things at you left and right, and you can hardly even keep up with it. Or, let's face it, there's sometimes you get in a conversation with people and you just learn very quickly they just know more than you do about the subject. They're more knowledgeable about it. And isn't that what we're all afraid of? And that's why a lot of people don't want to go into these conversations because they're afraid they're going to talk to somebody who knows more than they do. So what? Use your Columbo questions, all right? It can always get you out of the hot seat. If you ever find yourself in a conversation where you are kind of advocating for a view, where you're advancing a view, and they're disagreeing with you, and you're going back and forth, and it quickly becomes clear that whoever you're talking to knows more than you do, you just shift from being in your persuasion mode to shift into your fact-finding mode, all right? Change the conversation, ask them to slow down a bit, and just ask them your two Columbo questions. Okay, but hold on a second. I understand you just said, the moon is made of green cheese. Could you just slowly, so I want to understand this, could you tell me what you mean by that? All right, and let them explain what you mean by that. And then could you tell me again, how did you come to that conclusion? What is it that convinced you of this completely stupid decision? No, not that. You don't say that. But what is that led you to come to that conclusion? And then when they've done that, because you're basically inviting them to show you how smart they are. Everybody loves that, right? When they've done that, you know what you say? Thanks. Now let me think about it, and maybe we can talk about this more later, if that's okay. I want some time to kind of process what you said. And you're out. Conversation is done. No pressure on you. All right? Am I saying this is what you do in every conversation? No. But if you get in these situations where you're outgunned, there's a graceful way to still use these questions to maybe make a little bit of headway, but then make a smooth exit. And you know what you do after you say that? You do that, all right? Now you go back and you research. Now that you've gotten this information and you've learned what their view is and why they believe it, you go back and you actually study it. And then figure out what the answer would be. Oh, you say, oh man, if I'd only known this, I would have said this, right? We all have been there, right? So you research it after the fact. You can then practice, and I encourage you to practice what you would say. If you have a friend that'll let you bounce it off of them, do it that way. And then if this is a person that maybe you still have a connection with so you can continue the conversation, then do. continue the conversation. And if it's not, if it's just some stranger you met on the street, okay, but you're still not going to be better equipped for the next conversation that you have. Because I got news for you. There are actually a very limited number of excuses, reasons, objections people give to the Christian faith. They have their little varieties in them, but you could have kind of categorize these things into certain categories. And over time, by engaging these conversations, you'll learn what those are. And you'll start to figure out how to respond to them. But you know the best way to figure out how to respond to them? Is by going out and having the conversations and asking these Columbo questions so you learn what people think. Because if you don't learn what people think and you're afraid to go have the conversations, you're never going to learn, and you'll be just as ill-equipped 10 years from now as you are today. Instead, get out, use these tactical questions without feeling threatened, exit the conversation when you feel like you need to exit the conversation, study, learn more, and get better the next time. All right? That's how we handle it. All right. And the last subject, see, this is a shorter class tonight than we've been having, but the last thing I want to talk about is what do you do when they change the subject? Because this happens all the time. All the time. People will try to avoid answering your questions. So one approach you'll get when you ask them, well, how'd you come to that conclusion, is what we saw before with Frank Turek, right? Just Google it. Just Google it. Another very common response is they will just not, they will change the subject completely. They will just say, well, you know, whatever, but you still believe that a donkey can talk. You know, or something, you know, I'm using that. That was Balaam, in case you haven't heard the story, okay? You can look it up. Balaam and the donkey. Google it. No, but they'll just shift the focus to something else. And pay attention to your conversations, people, because I guarantee you let this go in a lot of your conversations in day-to-day life, where you'll ask somebody a question. Anybody ever have, you know, kids? Do kids do this? Yep. When they've got hand caught in the cookie jar, you know, they'll try to change the subject, right? To get off this thing that is making them uncomfortable. Guess what? Adults do it too. And you need to be able to gracefully, I don't want to say call them on it, but prevent them from doing that. And so what I will do when I have somebody where it's clear that I've asked them a, you know, what do you mean by that question, or how do you come to that conclusion question, and it's you can see the little hamster wheel going on inside their head where they realize, I don't really know how to answer that. I'm feeling like I might be trapped here. Then they'll just kind of shift this to some other subject. And I'll just try to say, you know what? That's a good point. What you just said right there, that's a really good question. That is a good point. And I do think that is worth talking about, and we absolutely should. I'm just not sure we quite finished this first subject yet. So tell you what, let's finish answering this question I asked you here a second ago, and then once we're done there, absolutely, put a pin in it. I promise you, we will talk about this other subject. All right? And then, of course, if you do get to the point, then you fulfill your word and you do come back and talk about that. But you know what happens? To this day, I've never had that actually pan out that way. Because when I ask somebody, I say that to someone, hopefully I'm successful in getting them back to the original topic. But you know what they do eventually? They try changing the subject again. And so we end up getting this huge list of things like, oh, well, you know, yeah, we'll get back to that. But you want to be graceful about it, to not let them shift the focus, because this is common on the internet. You ever go into like the comment sections of like a YouTube video or a Facebook post? If you read like comment 20, you would have no idea what this original subject was back in comment number 1. Because this is what happens. Somebody makes a comment, and then someone challenges them, and rather than respond to the challenge, they'll say something new. And then rather than holding their feet to the fire, this person will just try to answer the new thing. And they'll say another new thing and another new thing. And it keeps going on. Whereas what we need to do is kind of hold people's feet to the fire and say, you know what, let's talk about that first. Let's finish talking about this first. And then we'll go on to the other subjects. All right? And again, understand that eventually, if they don't want to, if they're really feeling trapped and they don't want to admit it, then what do? At some point, you just end the conversation, right? Politely, gracefully, say, "That's great. Thanks for talking to me today. If you ever, maybe we can do this again sometime over coffee. I'll pay or something like that. I'll treat. You know." You do, again, always keeping in mind that your ultimate goal is just to put a stone in their shoe, just to give them something to nag at them. And it's a feeling you get by doing it, as far as how far to push it. And when you're pushing it too far, the best guideline I can give you is if that conversation is starting to show some animosity, if you can see there's some emotions starting to brew, end it. It's done. It does, and I don't care whether you've done everything right. You could be the most polite person on the face of the earth. If they're starting to get angry, end it. Stop it. Because it doesn't matter. At that point, they're not listening to you anymore. It's not effective. You're better off ending it there, because then you might have the chance to pick it up again later on. Or even if it's not you, someone else might get the chance to pick it up with them again later on. All right? Whereas if you get them angry, their brain shuts off, and now you've got some emotional baggage they're going to have to overcome as well. All right? Yeah.
Quick question.
Sure.
How do you deal with people who believe in God
Mm-hmm.
and they are truly serving other people, and I would say living out their faith,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't necessarily believe that Jesus was born,
Mm-hmm.
all of that. But they believe in God and they live really good lives. Because that, if I'm misunderstanding this is when you meet people who are not Christians, who are non-believers, and you just want to kind of push them into thinking about, maybe you should think about it.
This can apply even beyond that. I mean, this tactical approach can apply to any kind of conversation, really, where there's some kind of disagreement. I mean, it can apply. You have somebody that comes to you and says that, we shouldn't have turkey for Thanksgiving, but we should only have ham. Really? How'd you come to that conclusion? I mean, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but it can apply to other conversations as well. And so if I had someone in that scenario, for those that didn't hear, she's asking about, what if you have someone who believes in God and is helping people and doing good things, but they don't necessarily believe in Jesus? How do you handle that? The same way, the exact same way. God does open these doors, I firmly believe. And so when something comes up, some conversation comes up, you use your Columbo questions. Because here's the thing. Truth is exclusive. And we've talked about this, I know, before. There are not multiple pathways up the mountain. Okay, there's one. And it's Jesus. And that's what he said. I am the way, the truth, the life. Our culture today wants to make it seem like there's multiple different paths. And whatever path you're on, as long as you're on it sincerely, it's good enough. You know what? If you're on top of a mountain and there's 10 roads on top of that mountain and 9 of them go off the edge of a cliff and only one goes down safely, does it matter which road you're on? Sure it does. All right? Sure it does. No matter how happy the other roads make you to be on. All right? It does matter. And so truth does matter. And the fact that we kind of, I think, sometimes sugarcoat it in the sense that, or minimize it, we try to say, well, that they're a good person. Look, folks, none of us are good people. I mean, because when we say someone's a good person, we're comparing them to other people. That's like comparing, how dirty is this rag compared to all the other dirty rags? This one's not as dirty, so it's a good clean rag. Doesn't make it clean. We compare it to the spotless rag, and that's what determines all of us are dirty rags in that regard. So there's no such thing as a good person. There's just good by our human standards. But God doesn't measure by our human standards. So it does matter whether you believe in Jesus or not, whether you've accepted Jesus or not. But the approach would be the exact same thing. Graciously, without animosity. They obviously have beliefs, and so you ask them, how do you come to that conclusion? And I'll give you one scenario that's similar to what you're asking that I have dealt with in the past. There's a lot of people out there that say, well, I believe in God, but I don't think I have to go to church. Really, what do you mean by that, first of all? What do you mean by the church, and how did you come to that conclusion? That second Columbo question is great in that scenario. How did you come to that conclusion? Because you know how most people came to the conclusion that they don't feel they have to go to church? Because they don't want to go to church. I mean, that's it. They want to sleep in Sunday mornings or go to the football games. Not all. Some people, the answer, you might actually get an answer, and you'll find out it's because they've had some of that church hurt that Pastor Reese was talking about 2 weeks ago, right? And so some people do have reasons, but a lot of them, it's just because they just don't want to. And so I would do the same thing. The approach is the same. So, yeah.
Okay, I was at a party and someone said, oh, I'm Wiccan, and the other guy said, oh, I'm pagan. So what is, I said, well, I'm a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
But then I didn't really know where to go with it from there.
My suggestion would not to even say you're a Christian in that scenario. It would be, well, I'm Wiccan. Oh, what do you mean by that?
Okay.
You see? And because now you haven't made a claim Because the moment you say I'm Christian, and again, it depends. This is, ladies and gentlemen, this specific scenario she's giving me. For those who are online, maybe didn't hear it. She said she was at a party, and one person said I'm Wiccan, another person said I'm pagan, and she says I'm Christian. There was a door, there was an opening there. But the moment you say in that scenario I'm Christian, you've made a claim. And so now they can turn it around on you and say, well, why are you a Christian? And now you have the burden of proof.
They didn't do that.
Right, but they could have.
Yeah.
And so I think the door to open that conversation was, really, you're wicked. What do you mean by that? You know, because I mean, and this is something I also encouraged back in our comparative religion study. I told a story of somebody who said, well, they came up to, I think it was Ravi Zacharias. I'm probably getting my apologists confused now. But they asked, well, I got a friend who's Hindu. No, it was Greg Koukl. Said, I have a friend who's Hindu. Can you tell me what Hindus believe so I can know better how to talk to them? And he said, no, what you need to do is go ask your friend what they believe. The same thing, people will say they're Wiccan. I know generally what Wiccan beliefs are, but that doesn't mean that that particular person has those beliefs. So I would have said, you say, hey, can you tell me what do you mean by that? What's that mean? And learn more about their beliefs. And then you can use, and ultimately where this goes, keep in mind, we're only 2/3 of the way through the Columbo question. What we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks, all right, because there is no class next week, it's Thanksgiving Eve. We do have a worship service at 6:30, followed by a pie social afterwards. Free pie. Come eat free pie. All right? But we'll be back here in 2 weeks where we'll be talking about the third way you can use the Columbo tactic, the third way you can use questions. And this is what I call the lawyer cross-examination approach, but more gracious. I'm going to show you how you can use questions to actually make a point. And so it's still gracious, because what ultimately happens when you're using questions to make your point, then the people are coming to the conclusion themselves, as opposed to you just talking at them, you preaching at them, in which case their defenses go up and they're not going to want to listen. So that probably would have been how that situation could have been handled. You ask them your first 2 Columbo questions, learn more about it, and then depending on what they say, you could use some questions to kind of make a point through all that. But ultimately, it's still a matter of you're at a party, they're friends, social gathering, you put the stone in their shoe, and then you go to the punch bowl. Yeah. Here and then here, yeah. Yeah, you're next. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. If you don't mind, I start really kind of got preoccupied with her friends.
Mm-hmm.
Because according to the Bible, right, I think you mentioned about that. About the prophet Isaiah said that our righteousness is filthy as
Filthy rags, yeah.
Filthy rags. And also in Romans 3:23, all of the humanity, all of us fell short of glory. So
Right. No one is righteous, no, not one.
They cannot get salvation by themselves. And according to Romans 10, verse 9 and 10, if they are not believing with their hearts and soul and mind that Jesus Christ is God and the living resurrected Son of God, and He's our Savior and Redeemer by His blood, and confess it with their mouth, then they shall be saved. But if they don't do that, they are not saved.
Right.
So that's why I'm really going to pray for my friends, because it's nice that they're nice people, but they're not safe, and it's kind of scary.
And that's what I meant by truth matters.
We're going to pray for them.
Yeah, truth does matter, and we need to be. It's hard. Let's not kid ourselves. It's difficult, but we do sometimes. We ourselves are tempted to judge by human standards as opposed to God's standards. And it's hard, because that's what our culture wants to do, and we do love people very, very much. Like I said, I just recently had a friend pass away, and every indication was she was not a believer, and so that's hard to handle in that situation.
This woman was raised in Germany, and
so she should be Lutheran. She was raised in Germany.
Lutheran, but she said, I have a problem, and she's an extremely intelligent woman, which is maybe part of the problem because she's overthinking it. But I've tried to just say, you have to understand, if you were raised as a Lutheran, or if you were at one time a Christian, your family was Christian, what made you decide that the Bible says Jesus was born, he's the only way
Mm-hmm.
to have everlasting life. And she just simply said, I don't know who wrote the Bible. How do we know that it's genuine? And I'm not smart enough to answer that.
No, but you didn't have to, you see, and this is why the tactical approach comes in. All right, you started out right. You asked her, basically, how'd you come to that conclusion? And she then made another claim, where she said, essentially, now she might couch it like she's trying to again bounce it off of you, but she was making another claim when she said, no, how do we trust what the Bible says? Ask your next Columbo question. So you don't think the Bible's trustworthy? Why do you think that? You see?
Because she doesn't know who wrote it.
Okay, but this is what I mean. You ask there was another opportunity there to ask another. How'd you come to that conclusion? Question. And so that you could. That's why we want to encourage questions, and this can go on multiple times because sometimes people will just make another claim and another claim and another claim, and you keep asking them, how'd you come to that conclusion? Yeah.
My daughter, she was baptized when she was born.
Mm-hmm.
And then she went to Sunday school, all that, until she was teenagers and she came here. And now she become atheist. She doesn't believe in God. Her husband doesn't believe in God because she married with the one, entire family is atheist. So she become. And I know, it's very sorry.
It's sad.
So I asked her, you don't believe in God? No. I said, how do you think we come from? He said, from monkey. I said,
That's not even scientifically accurate, but hey.
because a monkey doesn't become human. He said, because it's different genetic or something. I say, so who created monkey? And then I know, I cannot ask her more, like who created monkey though.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know she's going to get mad. Because, I know she's going to get mad
Right.
because she knows. But the thing is, she told me, it's okay, you believe in God because you need it. It's okay because you need it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe it. So, Mom, you believe what you believe. I don't stop you, and don't stop me what I don't believe.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And what?
So we're going to pray for her.
Yes.
please.
And what
I pray for her every day, and sometimes once in a while, I just say good morning, and I say, God loves you. And she doesn't, but she doesn't, get mad or anything, but she doesn't reply if I say. If she has something, I just say, I pray for you, but she said, okay, you pray.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you pray. Because if you want to pray, you pray. And she doesn't argue with me about God. She, in her mind, is just, I respect what you believe in God, that's fine. I don't.
Which, look, ultimately, we talked about this beforehand. Nothing we will do. We do not have the power to convince anyone. Unless the Holy Spirit convinces them, we're not going to convince them. But what you can do in that type of situation, when you're facing another cultural phenomenon, or maybe a couple different cultural phenomenons. Number one is people love to assume motive, all right? When she says something like, you believe in God because you need it. I know that. When people have tried that approach with me, I had an old lawyer friend of mine try that approach with me. Say, no. I don't believe in God because I need it. God is not just there for some crutch for me. Yes, he's my God, so I can lean on him. But I believe in God and I believe in Jesus because it's true. All right? That's why I believe, because this is true. Not because it's not wishful thinking. It's factual thinking, Yeah, and so I will sometimes, again, graciously correct people, because people do that all the time. They want to believe that the only reason you believe is because you need it. Why? Because that makes them feel better. Because then, the whole reason they're saying that is because then they can convince themselves that they don't need to believe in God because they don't think they need him. All right? Yeah, and so that's one of the things that you confront. Yeah.
Have you found it's harder to defend things or to talk with people with churches who are not Bible believing? And so therefore you give, in conversation, you give your thoughts about things because the Bible says. But we have so many mainline denominations who are
Yeah.
attacking things that we know are sin,
I mean, you got to know where your starting point is. And I will tell you, this was actually, remember that podcast I did last night I was telling you about? This is largely what it was based on, because you have to understand where those mainline denominations are coming from. And it's not going to do any good to say to somebody from one of those churches, well, the Bible says this, the Bible says this, the Bible says this. Because they believe sincerely that the Bible can mean essentially whatever they want it to mean, whatever culture says it to mean. Like I said, that pastor I was telling you about was not only was she saying that God's a liar and Satan was the one telling the truth, but her entire argument was that it was a good thing that Eve took the fruit and ate it. Because that's how we all can tell right from wrong today. If Eve hadn't done that, none of us would be able to know right from wrong. So it was a good thing. She was praising Eve. And you got to understand where this comes from. It's a postmodern philosophy. And I'll try not to overcomplicate it, but here's where the thinking is. When you read something, all right, when you read a book, when you read a text, any kind of text, naturally we all bring things to it, don't we? We have our own life experiences, our own culture, our own predispositions that are going to influence how we understand what we read, all right? And so what these mainline churches and this philosophy says is that's true no matter when you read anything. Therefore, no text, including the Bible, really has any true meaning because we all bring our own different meanings to it. That's a bunch of baloney. And the way I usually get around that is like this particular preacher that I was talking about last night, she serves with Planned Parenthood. She's very much pro-abortion. And I just like to say when I have people like that, I say, okay, so if that's true, I agree with you, by the way, that we all have assumptions, predispositions, cultural biases that we bring along with us when we're reading things and that affect the way we interpret them. That's absolutely correct. But now you're trying to jump from that to say, therefore, there is no correct interpretation. So if that's true, then I'm going to interpret your words to mean that you are staunchly pro-life and you think any doctor who performs an abortion should be incarcerated immediately. Is that a legitimate, fair interpretation of your words that I should make? And of course, the answer is no, because I'm saying the exact opposite of what they're actually arguing for, right? Here's the thing. The correct meaning of a text or of words is whatever meaning was intended by the original author. All right? And so, yes, we do have biases we bring to it, but we need to try to do what we can. There's techniques you can do. It's called hermeneutics, whole big class you learn in seminary about it, about how to get around those biases to properly interpret and discover what the original author's intended meaning was. So, in answer to the question about how you deal with people like that, it's the same basic approach. You're still going to be using this tactical approach. It's just more a matter of when we get to this stirred phase where you're using questions to try to get to make a point, you've got to understand where they're coming from so that you can ask effective questions, which is what makes those first two questions, so especially the first one, so important. Ask, what do you mean by that? So if I have somebody from one of those denominations, I will just use the same tactical approach where they'll say, well, this church down the road preaches X, Y, or Z. Okay, but what do you believe? That's a variety of what do you mean by that? And so I understand what that church says, but what do you believe? All right, and get them to try to explain to me what they believe and go from there.
This has gotten harder because they have, and it doesn't help. For instance, I belong to the ELCA church, and the ELCA was starting to know where it went.
Right.
And there was a lot, the pastor that we had at that time did not accept what was happening in the ELCA. He was eventually kicked out of the ELCA. But the bishop of Maryland at that time, Delaware Synod, Maryland Synod said that the Bible had errors in it. Stood up at a congregational meeting outside and said the Bible had errors in it. And somebody said, what do you mean?
Right.
The men who had studied, And he said, well, one place said that something, how Jesus died, and the other was his insides, he fell. And
The two competing Judas death stories, supposedly.
And this gentleman said, have you never heard of the fact that Judas probably hung on that tree for so long that rigor mortis set in?
And he fell and his guts spilled out, right.
So he could bring those two and left the bishop a little tongue-tied.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking it's just like all of us witness an accident, every one of us would find it a little bit different.
But there's still a core belief, and this is man, maybe I should reteach it. There was a class I taught here. It's on the YouTube channel. That I've done several classes. One was cracking open the hard parts of the Bible, and we talked about some of these same things in there and how to handle those situations. Because you're right, eyewitnesses. Did you know, for example, that there were eyewitnesses to the sinking of the Titanic, some of whom said the Titanic broke in half before it went down, and there were others who adamantly insisted it did not, that it went down whole. All right, those are two contradictory accounts. Would it be legitimate from those two eyewitness accounts to conclude that the Titanic never sunk in the first place? No, because they agree on that, right? And so the mere fact that there's some disagreement on the peripheral issues doesn't mean there's not a core in the center that they agree upon that we need to look at. So that, I mean, yeah, but you're right. I mean, those, well, I don't know if I'd say it gets harder, it's just different. It changes, you know.
What the Catholic Church did today, the Pope just said, you know, they're opening their doors to homosexuality.
I think they put it as an agenda item, unless you have new information.
Mm-hmm.
They put it on as an agenda item on the symposium. Both that and women serving in the Catholic Church,
Mm-hmm.
and whether or not Catholic priests should get married. I think they have a laundry list of things that they're going to discuss.
Doesn't mean they've necessarily concluded anything yet.
Well, they did
Clear
accept the
statement.
fact that transgenders can now become vaccinated.
Yes.
But godparents didn't.
Well, they and we're getting kind of sidetracked here, but what they actually said, to be fair, was, yes, you know, you could have someone who is transgender become a godparent, but then there was a caveat put on the end of it where he said, as long as it doesn't create division within the church. Well, what does that mean? And that was kind of the, and so it's like, okay, do you mean somebody who just suffers from gender dysphoria? Because understand, you can suffer from gender dysphoria, and there are plenty of people out there who do suffer from gender dysphoria, but are not choosing to live a transgender lifestyle, you know? And so is that what you meant by that? In which case, well, okay, that's somebody who's struggling with sin like the rest of us are, but trying to honor Christ. We get that. And so it wasn't very specific what was said, and that was one of the articles I was reading on it was saying that. So, but I don't think that it's necessarily any harder. Look, I've been doing this, I've been an apologist now and getting involved in apologetics for over 2 decades. And I will tell you that the types of questions that I was being asked when I first started doing this are not necessarily the same questions I'm getting asked today. There's similarities. I mean, there's like I said, there's not a whole lot of objections people have, but there's new approaches they may take to it. There's new styles. Like there's a lot more animosity today. There's a lot more ridicule and just belittling going on today. But yeah, like, I'll give you a classic example. I've got a lot of people that will try to say, well, did you know, why does the Bible never speaks out about this particular issue, never condemns this particular issue, pick whatever issue it is. And we're like, okay, but if that wasn't an issue, it wasn't even an issue at the time, that was prominent in the culture, why would you expect the Bible to speak out about it? Because whatever the culture, like the Bible never speaks against transgenderism. Well, yeah, because people weren't trying to live transgender lifestyles 2,000 years ago. So why, I mean, it does, but it does have some teachings, right, it does have teachings that bear on that, and we talked about that in a previous class. But people will say that there's no explicit condemnation of insert whatever the current cultural issue is here, right? And it's like, well, of course we wouldn't expect there to be, because that wasn't an issue at the time. And so the issues that we have to address do change. I don't necessarily think it's harder or easier, but it is different, and that is why we do need to be at the forefront. You need to be out there having these conversations so you know what people are saying, so that we can respond to it. Yeah?
Or women pastors?
Women pastors is something that, look, my personal view on that is I do think that is a what we call a periphery issue. I do think, I understand both, here's the mistake some people make. They will say, this is what I think the Bible teaches, and therefore anybody who claims to be Christian that doesn't agree with me is only doing it because they want to try to sin, and they want to try to get away with it. I think we need to be more gracious on issues like that, and say that, no, it is possible for people to both be looking at this and say that I think the Bible teaches this, and someone else thinks I think the Bible teaches this. And obviously, we should always be trying to strive for what the truth is. And so we should be having these conversations in the church about what the proper interpretation of the Bible is and what was actually meant by it. But the moment we start down the path of saying, well, you're just influenced by culture, and that's it. You just want to give into the culture. That's why you think what you think. Don't tell someone else why they think what they think, all right? Listen to what they say. I am an apologist. So an apologist basically means I am a proponent of mere Christianity. My job as an apologist is to bring people to the foot of the cross. And then as far as what denomination they're going to go to from there, I leave that to the pastors and theologians, right? My job is, what's the gospel? You are a sinner. You deserve death. Jesus died and paid the price for your sins. If you have that his payment imputed to you, then you are saved and you get to live eternally for God. That's what we as Christians need to primarily focus on. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be talking about those other questions. We should, but we shouldn't be dividing ourselves over them. Yes.
I think according to the Bible, it's very clear. Galatians, I guess the Apostle Pavel stated that in Galatians 3, verse 28, when God saying there is no more Greeks, pagans, or Romans, right? There is no more God's people, Jewish people. There is no more black. There is no more white. There is no more female. There is no more male. So it doesn't matter if you're female or male. All of us is one in Christ.
Yes, we are one in Christ, and we need to think of it that way.
You know, if, like you said, women or men, stating the word of God or has the knowledge on the word of God, as long as this is helping what God's wanted for us to bring everyone to the cross, like you say, for humanity salvation, really doesn't matter what gender you are, if you're female or male, XY or XX chromosome, doesn't matter. Right?
Well, and I'll give you the counterpoint. Now, understand, you know where I stand because I work at a church with a female associate pastor, okay? So that's out there. You know where I stand on this issue. But to give you the counterpoint, they'll look at all the passages where Paul is describing the criteria, the credentials that you need to meet in order to serve in these judicial offices, and he always uses the male pronoun throughout there. A husband of one wife. And so the counterpoint is people look to those passages and say he's always using the male pronoun, so therefore you have to be male. The question then is, well, wait a minute. But is he establishing a universal rule for all time, or is he speaking to something, the circumstances of that particular church in that particular scenario? That's where the disagreement comes in, but that's why it's a secondary issue, and we shouldn't be dividing the church over it.
Another argument on that, too, is that, as before Paul says, that women should be quiet in the church.
That's another one that comes up. Yes. We folks, I said this was going to be a class we were going to be done early, and now we're getting done late. But that's great. I love the questions, but I am going to wrap it up here. If you have anything else you want to ask me about, feel free to come forward. Otherwise, come for free pie next week, plus the worship, and then I'll see you in 2 weeks for the next part of the Columbo. Thanks.